it's an inheritance that's non-material. So for example, like the story that we pass from generation to generation, like that of wishes, memories, food, of course, language, culture, and just all the like interesting kinks that each family, the quirkiness that each family has that passed down to each generation. I think that for me is heritage. One of the biggest thing is language, because I grew up in like a Chinese language, not the English language. So I think that shapes a lot of the way that I think. It's just like, there's a saying called language is the home of being by Heidegger, which I think there's a lot of truth in it. Like as someone who's, I'm sure you understand, like multilingual, like you understand from different language perspective, like if you say this same thing, it can come up in totally different perspective and different like sort of tone. I think like that for me automatically give me a different worldview, like versus someone who's like natively English speaking. Yeah, and I think language also play a big part in how I conceptualize my artwork, because like I think Chinese language is very pictorial in a way, and a lot of the moral stories, I guess, like going back, like because when you ask me about picture book, I automatically think of the like Christian Andersen, that kind of classic fairy tale. But like in Chinese story, there's a lot of them, not necessarily picture book, not necessarily children's story, but like just idioms, like 4 words idiom that has a long, rich story embedded within it. Like simple phrases such as, the monkey fishing for the moon, which essentially means like a fruitless task, like someone's trying to pursue something that's in vain, like the monkey is trying to get a reflection of the moon from a lake that's undoable. Something like that is, when you say that phrase, it seems like completely irrelevant, literally from what you're trying to express, but everyone understands the context and automatically contextualize like how that story applied to everyday situation. And for me, like that's how I approach my conceptual illustration as well. Like if I'm giving a more abstract concept, like for example, is for some financial magazines about risk, like I will try to come up with some kind of visual metaphor. And I think the way that I do that is very much tied to my being in the Chinese language, the very, very like visual way of telling story with words. I read a very interesting article saying that why in general, like the Asians have a more innate habit to save is also because there's no clear distinguish, like there's no tenses in our verbs, right? So like, for example, if you want to indicate the future, you have to clearly say like tomorrow or in the future. But otherwise, when you say an action, it's the same as how you would say it as right now, the present. So that sort of makes the future seems much more immediate than the English language. And that sort of help, I guess, maybe more of the mindset embedded in us, the urgency, to save for tomorrow. So that's one theory that I read that is quite interesting. And they also talk about how, the language itself also contribute to how we see math differently, because it's all like for example, the additive system is embedded within the language. Like there's 1 to 10, and when it's 11, it's just 10, 1. So automatically you already understand 11 is 10 plus 1, rather than having a new word 11, and then have to understand how the math work behind that. So it's just interesting how the language help us like shape our mind in so many different ways. I think it's more of just being immersed in that culture, the aesthetic, like the color palette, of course, is also influenced, by the Chinese art aesthetic. Like you grew up with your mom's home cooking, like you develop a palate for that kind of food. Like for example, Chinese is very much like a lot of soy sauce is like the base color of everything, you know. So for you, like at least for me, that is what I gravitate towards. The same, I think, as with my visual language and artwork. Like I grew up with a set of baseline that I feel like this is home, this is comfortable. And then I came out to the US, I studied Western art, and all of these new influences are like new ingredient that add to my basic sort of recipe. And eventually, what I output is my sort of taste, my basic taste, plus all my experiences and preferences. And that will be the output. Sometimes I'm not sure I feel like I belong anywhere, honestly, like because I still call Hong Kong my hometown, but every time I go back, so much has changed. I don't really know like the new slangs that people use, or I don't really know the pop singer they're listening to. Whereas, my entire adulthood happened in America. So in that sense, I'm much more connected to certain aspects, and then my professional language I also developed here. So in a way, it's sort of Frankenstein, I guess. That's why I also feel like for me, home is really, my culture. That's something that not necessarily geographical, but what like ground me and what root me as a person and as an artist. It's like a set of maybe values, like how, for example, how my parents raised me, like how I raise my toddler son now. Even though like we live in LA, that could look different than other families. Like the holidays that we still celebrate, like obviously Chinese New Year, Lunar New Year, and the kind of special dishes, like for example for birthday we'll have dumplings. All of these things I think are home to me. I guess I'm lucky that like besides the identity of being, like Chinese, I'm also an artist. So I think my most immediate community in America are actually the artist community. I think that's very great about that. It's like for example, people ask me if I had any kind of cultural shock when I first moved here for college. And truth be told, like maybe so with food and daily life, but not so in a intellectual way. In some way, I almost felt like, I finally belong. Because there are all these people that's kind of like weird in their own ways, that's like outcast or weirdo. But then of course, that's all the unique quality that makes their artwork stand out. And things that used to be maybe a little bit strange become the qualities that people appreciate. And I think that has a very strong, like that kind of mutual appreciation and understanding of each other's like story, even though maybe it's from very different cultural background. It's a very strong binding experience. Some of my closest friends are still, like friends from college, even though now we don't live in the same city. Food is a huge part.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I keep talking about food, but like food, I'm sure as Vietnamese as well, like Chinese, it's not just nourishment, but it's a social event. Like whenever we have celebration, like food is the foremost things, like not necessarily presents. Like maybe in the West, it's like a birthday, we think about presents. Christmas, we think about what to gift. But like for us, it's always like, where should we go eat? Like it's Chinese New Year, it's grandma's, birthday, like which restaurant or, should we go to? So that kind of collectively and, like sharing family style, I think that itself is very different than, like unique. Each person has their own plate and then have their own, like courses. That's a very different dining experience. So yeah, like through eating for sure is a big bonding experience, with my family, with my, Chinese, Asian friends. Even though Hong Kong is quite westernized, but I would say Seoul is in a way that is very also localized, like Hong Kong food sort of, because I think Cantonese people just love to eat so much, like any Western influence that come in immediately become absorbed and then sort of fuse with local stuff. Like for example, with breakfast, we would have macaroni, but in a very Hong Kong style and like a soupy base rather than, like a dry mac and cheese kind of way. And then with like seasoning, that's very Chinese. So things it's hard to define, like unless you clearly go to say a French bistro. For daily like common food, it's hard to separate, like where the east start and where the west end. Everything is very much fused together. So that part is still quite different than say American food. But I do feel like because Hong Kong is such a melting pot, and US as well, and especially art school with all this international student, maybe that also helped me to get assimilated or get into the community faster. I want to go back to a little bit of that sense of belonging too. Like I think that question has come up more than ever, like, and me and my husband also talk about, like, is it safe to raise our kid, in a community where we don't feel wanted? Like before that, I honestly, I felt nothing but pride for my identity, like until maybe the pandemic and all this anti-Asian hate started. Like, not saying that it changed how I feel about myself, but it makes me realize that like there are people, maybe I've just been like, too very lucky in like the art community, art bubble, they're very sheltered. But honestly, it was a first time shock to me that like how other community or other people see us just based on, how we look and all the different stereotype. And yeah, like we live in Santa Monica, which is a pretty liberal progressive city, but even so, we have personal experience of like anti-Asian hate, and of course like things that we see on the news are way worse. And it just, yeah, like how do you call a place home when you don't even feel safe? That's my question about belonging. Like I actually have been carrying, like pepper spray when I walk my baby outside, because you don't know what will happen. But like nothing has happened, but it's more like that sense of fear that I feel that is quite unfair, for our community, that you are living in your city, like you're a contributing like member of this community, you're a taxpayer, you have the right to feel at home and feel safe, but then that has been stripped away from you, and it's a great sense of like helplessness, I think. I think it can play a very important role. Like for example, one in the case of wishes is like both Moon and my wish that like this book can reach outside of the immediate like say Vietnamese or Asian immigrant community, but also people who might not have that kind of family story, for them to have a moment to sort of empathize, sort of like see the story from a very personal point of view, to not just learn it like a history lesson, but feel it, like what is it like to kind of have this kind of experience. And I think having that is important to, have better conversation, better dialogue. I think easier to dissolve that feeling of otherness, like, you guys are so alien, you guys are so different, but that kind of story is sort of humanized, like experiences that otherwise might be foreign to people. With the other project that I'm also exhibiting, the Yellow Submarine Rising, is a project honor. That in a sense is different. That is more like we do it for our community. Like it's more like a assertion that like it doesn't matter, you know, like how you want to portray us or how you want to put us down. Like we are so proud of what we do. We still are entitled to all the daily joy that, you know, that is our achievement, big or small. And that is a sense of, I guess, you know, cheering our own community on, you know, like we're more of a, I guess, the visible way of saying, you know, it's not you, like we're also here for you, like we're all in this together. So I think those two are two different examples of what art can do, you know, in times like this. Honestly, any kind of legacy, right? If someone can leave any kind of legacy, that's already more than most can hope for. So yeah, I hope that when I'm gone, like my work can still be relevant somehow, and people can still, you know, like find or feel something in it. Yeah, I think time is the best test, you know, of the impact of an artist's work. Like whether you're relevant for just a few years, a decade, or obviously I hope to the work can still have some relevance, you know, in 100 years. But you know, that's beyond my control. I want my son to be a good person, and I want him to, like, whatever he pursue in his life, like I want it to be meaningful. Like I hope, like my husband is also an architect, so like we pursue our passion as career, which is not necessarily the easiest like way to make a living sometimes, but like I want that to set an example for him, like, you know, like this, so he doesn't get lost in, you know, all this materialistic things, which I feel like is so easy growing up in the like social media sort of generation, that we luckily sort of didn't, like we're the generation right before that, you know. So I want him to stay grounded, to find his, you know, his calling in a way, and that will make him feel like his life is meaningful. Whether he's successful or not, that's, you know, again, out of his control, our control, but I want him to feel like there's no regret, you know, at the end of his life.